Now, if I'm honest, I'm generally not proud of how I spent the last year of my life cooped up indoors, but there is one thing I managed that will honestly stick with me for the rest of my life. At the age of 32, I taught myself how to ride a bike, specifically a Specialized Turbo Vado SL e-bike, which was honestly just a lot of fun coming to grips with, going up and down the hills of Prospect Park, and generally getting a feel for what it's like to be a cyclist in a city. So when the opportunity arose to try a completely different kind of e-bike out, I obviously jumped at the chance, but this e-bike was nothing like what I expected. This is the Civilized Cycles Model 1, and as far as e-bikes go, it's unusual for a lot of reasons. Let's take a closer look. Now, right off the bat, I just have to say, this doesn't look like any e-bike or bike, for that matter, that I've ever seen. It actually kind of gives off pretty distinct Vespa vibes, which is maybe not a surprise when you consider the fact that Civilized Cycles founder and CEO Zachary Schieffelin actually opened Manhattan's very first Vespa dealership around 20 years ago. The Vespa is about having fun, but there's a practical element too. You can fit two people on it and sort of bop around without having to worry about things too much, and that very much applies to the Model 1 as well. In some ways, it's about the most practical and most family-friendly e-bike I've ever seen. It can seat two people with no problem. The maximum weight this thing can hold is 400 pounds, and there's plenty of room for storage around back too, which is actually really quite nice when you consider just how difficult it is to lug stuff around on an e-bike sometimes. Now, with all that said, this sort of practical approach and this cargo-friendly approach, that has its cost. For one, this thing is pretty heavy by bike standards. The Specialized Turbo Vado that I tried out earlier this year, that was about 35 to 40 pounds depending on how you had it configured. Easy enough to kind of get it out your apartment door without too much trouble, but not the kind of thing you'd love to lift all of the time. You can't lift the Model 1 at all. It's about 90 pounds, and even just trying to pick the thing up to reposition when you're just about to take off can take a bit of doing. Now, a bike as friendly looking as this maybe wouldn't seem to be the kind of thing you jump on and expect a lot of speed out of, but this thing does move. Thanks to a mid-drive motor and a 5-speed transmission, the maximum speed for the Model 1 tops out at around 28 miles per hour, which is definitely not enough to get you on the highway. Please God, don't even try. But more than enough to bop around the city picking up groceries and just taking in all of the sights, which is kind of what I tried to do when we tried this bike out around the Brooklyn Navy Yard. Now, unlike the Specialized that I cut my teeth on, this bike takes more of a hybrid electric approach. You can use pedal assist to really just take all of the work out of using the bike, which is really one of the big deals here. They don't want you to have to huff and puff taking this thing around. Again, that's important because this is as heavy as it is. But you also do have a throttle baked into the right handlebar, which is especially helpful when you just want to cut loose, don't want to work at all, and really kind of embrace the Vespa experience that kind of seems to run through this entire thing. Now, we probably could have opened it up a bit more. Our video producer, Brian O., who came to ride this thing with me, is an experienced cyclist. He's very good at it, and he seemed to have no problem kind of coming to grips with the amount of speed that's on offer here. Me, on the other hand, look, I'm better than I was, but I'm still pretty much a novice. So when I dialed this thing up to level 3 pedal assist, it was almost uncomfortably fast. Take it easy if you're like me and are just slowly tiptoeing into the world of e-bikes. With all that said, some of the design choices here feel a little odd to me. Changing gears on this thing with its 5-speed transmission isn't bad at all. It just requires you to fiddle with a knob on the left handlebar, which, again, no problems there technically, but it does kind of give the whole thing more of a city bike vibe rather than something more road friendly, which can take a little getting used to. Since this thing is pretty much meant to be on roads kind of all of the time, there are turn signals built into the bike itself, but actually getting to them can be sort of weird as well. The controls are actually on the tips of each handlebars. And again, if you're an experienced cyclist, maybe taking one hand off to just hit the button to let someone know you're turning left or right isn't a huge deal. But for me, a person who is still not mastered riding with anything less than full attention in both hands on both bars, yeah, probably wasn't going to work out. Oh, and Civilized Cycles says this seat is meant to be comfortable for anyone as short as 5'3", and I'm taller than that, but I still had trouble getting comfortable on this thing to start. That's because I have very short legs, and if that applies to you too, it doesn't matter how tall the full package is, getting both feet on the ground, which is the sort of preferred way to launch on one of these guys, is maybe not super comfortable. That said, they did give me a little tip that has helped pretty dramatically. Instead of trying to push off with the pedals like you normally would, just goose the throttle a little bit. That'll get you in motion and give you an opportunity to get your balance, which I definitely needed a lot of help with. Now, purely based on what we've talked about so far, the Model 1 is actually a pretty decent bike to just ride, but again, like I said, this is meant to be a more practical, family-friendly approach to e-bikes, so that's where the sort of back half of the bike really starts to shine. For one, there's a built-in suspension that you can adjust manually. So if you have two people on the bike, it's very easy to set the suspension to a setting that's comfortable for both riders. You hold down a button on the main control cluster on the left handlebar, an air pump kicks in and just sort of drops you to the ground and then rises you back up again once it gauges the total combined weight of all the riders. All of that leads to a surprisingly comfortable ride. Believe me when I tell you that Brian and I rode over every bit of debris, every bit of unpaved whatever, every sort of dip in the road, and as a passenger, sort of clutching to Brian the way Audrey Hepburn was holding on to Gregory Peck and Roman Holiday, it was incredibly comfortable, and that might be enough to get people sold on the idea of a $5,000 e-bike. And like I said before, this thing actually kind of shines when you're trying to lug stuff around. Mounted on both sides of the rear wheel are two panniers that in later models you'll eventually be able to open just by pressing a button, but for now you just sort of wedge your hands into some holes and pull the thing out. But even if you don't, the full volume of these panniers while closed is about 20 liters. When you open them though, it expands to a full 80 liters, so plenty of room for groceries. And it's worth noting that the sides of the panniers themselves are hard, so it's actually fairly easy to put grocery bags, or in my case, my backpack with my laptop and my camera in the side and not worry about them getting jostled around too much as I nudge into things. Now, there's more interesting stuff going on inside those panniers because that's where the batteries are stored. By default, the Model 1 is configured with a single battery that's rated for about 25 miles of range before it needs to be recharged again, but you actually can just slot in another battery on the other side of the rear wheel in the other pannier if you want to extend that range. And since the batteries aren't baked into the frame of the bicycle itself like we've seen so many other times, they're incredibly easy to replace or recycle when the batteries are depleted, which kind of reduces the need for Civilized cycles to worry about taking bikes apart and removing batteries and then having them recycled the way some bike manufacturers are having to figure out now. It's better for the environment and it's just in general more practical, also because there are USB ports baked into the batteries themselves, so you can always just plug in your phone or your tablet to recharge while you're riding or while you're waiting to ride. Now, in fairness, we didn't get a ton of time on this bicycle, so we couldn't really get a great sense of what long-term usability is like, durability, things like Civilized Cycles support plans. Those kind of remain to be seen. Civilized, I believe, says that you'll be able to get 3 years of sort of concierge service if you buy one of the Founders Editions, which are now up for pre-sale, but we'll see how things shake out once these things start being developed at scale. With all that said, we should probably talk about the price, which I kind of alluded to earlier. The Civilized Cycles Model 1 early bird pricing means you'll be able to pick one of these things up for $4,500. But if you wait longer and just generally hang out until this thing officially goes on sale later this year, you can expect to pay $5,500. In no uncertain terms, that's a lot of money. It's a vehicle to be sure, so obviously prices are just kind of up there. Again, the Turbo Vado SL from Specialized that I tried out was about $4,500, so it's not completely out of left field for a pricey premium e-bike, but it's definitely up there. Then again, like I said, this is not your typical e-bike. At the end of the day, the Model 1 really does feel like a pretty compelling blend of practicality with that suspension, with that pretty considerable cargo space, and just fun. I mean, who doesn't enjoy the idea of blasting around on an e-bike at close to 30 miles an hour? It's just a good time. Hopefully we'll get the chance to review it at some point, but unfortunately it won't be me doing it because, sad to say, this is my last video for Engadget. And I know that's kind of a hard left turn, but I just wanted to take a moment to say that I've appreciated making these videos and writing for all of you for all of these years. It's been an honor of a lifetime. I blogged in high school about how I wanted to work for Engadget, so this is one dream I can cross off my list. I hope you continue to support Engadget and all of our extremely, just so incredibly talented people here, and I'll see you when I see you. Perfect, all right. Bluetooth toothbrush.